people just don't believe it anymore, so they need to get it in at the level where it's 11 and 12-year-olds, who most of whom have never even heard about 9/11 or thought it was something completely different to what it was. So they're getting in very early with this Clockwork Orange-style brainwashing. They'll probably get out the eyebrow clips later on and subject the kids to this, because they say that it's to demolish conspiracy theories and the confusion surrounding the attacks. It's not confusion. It's the fact that people have looked into it for themselves, used critical thinking, God forbid, and are coming to their own conclusions, which is not what they want.
Well, Paul, the same thing is happening in the UK. They've, don't let them show the Al Gore film to kids because it's been proven in court it's a fraud. Here domestically, he gives cussing tirades at the Aspen Institute, saying no one is listening to us anymore, and admitting that he's being laughed at in most quarters. And it turns out the sea levels have dropped now. So Der Spiegel's reporting, global warming makes them drop, not rise. So many of their hoaxes, as the Club of Rome said, 20-something years ago in a report we've covered, they said we're going to use the threat of fake terror to take people's rights, but also climate change and other things to take people's rights. And it's just not working anymore. Now, shifting gears into another 9/11 area, I noticed the cover of Time magazine last week says the new greatest generation, military veterans, first responders, folks like that, how they're going to lead the leadership gap in America. The problem is the firemen, the police, the military that were heroes of 9/11, they've been barred from being at Ground Zero. That's now come out. So they've been barred from being there. And they now, even the French news agency today reports that they've got massive increases in cancer. And the reason that they're barred is because they're afraid to have them there at Ground Zero with the president and stuff, because they don't buy any of the official fables. They know the dust was deadly. So what does it say about the system having to circle the wagons that even the cops, the military, and the fire people are not welcome at the 10th anniversary?
Well, let's not forget that in the very days after 9/11, the government was caught in a brazen and transparent lie when the EPA announced that the air was safe to breathe. People trusted the government, and years later, the majority of 9/11 first responders are either dead or are sick and dying of these illnesses. So that's why they don't want them there, because the majority of people who are actually involved in the rescue mission are aware of 9/11 truth, because people like We Are Change have held numerous events to support these individuals as the government betrayed them, withheld the payments, which they're now finally being forced to give to them in drips and drops. But exactly, that's why they don't want them at the official memorial. They only want politicians there who can use it as a soapbox, as a photo op, because these first responders are genuine people who have found the truth, who have come to the truth, and many of them obviously witnessed the explosions, the demolitions on the day itself. That's why the government does not want them there.
That's right, Paul. Now, in closing, the biggest news here at the end, and then we're going to go to break and come back with Gerald Celente and this road warrior type scenario that we're facing as a society. L.A. Times, countless other publications have admitted, okay, the leader there in Libya is Al-Qaeda. We are giving them weapons. That's just the way it is. And it's being reported on the EU counterterrorism coordinator is saying that, yes, Al-Qaeda has gotten the weapons and is basically the new government. Now, this has been too much for Chuck Norris, who's been a big supporter of going after, quote, Muslim extremism. I've interviewed him on the show. He's awake to a lot of stuff, but he's come out and said feds still enable terrorists 10 years after 9/11. And the first thing he quotes is Infowars.com and how we showed the DHS training videos that are going out publicly, where all the terrorists are white people, and it's, quote, minorities reporting them. Now what this is just a rebranding. That, okay, first we went after a minority that was seen as unpopular, like Hitler did, so people would accept taking their rights. Now we're flipping it on a group that's seen, quote, as dominant. And the fact that Chuck Norris is coming out and saying, why are the feds enabling terrorists? And he talks about Anwar al-Awlaki hanging out at the Pentagon, the number 3 in Al-Qaeda, Paul. He talks about just this incredible development here, where the State Department won't release his public records of his travels, quote, for his privacy. No, they're covering up. So Chuck Norris comes within 1 micron of basically saying this whole thing's a fraud. and this is in Town Hall, WorldNet Daily, his columns carried by hundreds of newspapers. I think the system's gone too far. I had neighbors this weekend talking about how our government's putting and NATO's putting Al-Qaeda in Libya. Here's the headline at Infowars.com. You wrote, Chuck Norris warns of DHS war on white Americans. What do you make of this? I mean, this is just too much for people to be told you're giving your rights up because of Al-Qaeda, but the first responders aren't allowed at ground zero. And by the way, the big Al-Qaeda is whitey.
Well, it's waking up a lot of conservatives who wouldn't otherwise come to these conclusions because they've seen these DHS public service announcements and they've seen that in them the vast majority of the terrorists portrayed are white middle-class Americans and the people reporting them are minorities. Now, if it was the other side where it was all black people being the terrorists and all white people reporting them to the authorities, that would be just as scary. The fact is, the DHS is race baiting, and yet the Southern Poverty Law Center a few days ago comes out, admits that these DHS videos do contain, quote, mostly white terrorists, while actors portraying citizens who report their suspicious activities are all minorities. That's a quote. So they admit it. They admit that there's a racial dimension to these videos, and yet
they've got some ads where it's nothing but white people that are the terrorists. The point is that they're clearly rebranding it. And 3 years ago, we got the internal Homeland Security documents, Paul, and the whole thing was about gun owners, conservatives, libertarians, Ron Paul supporters, which then the left arm of the globalist vulture, Chris Matthews, says is all white. So, quote, minorities don't feel like they're welcome. But from a liberal perspective, it's not racism, but they sell, hey, you're not welcome there. Then they say, okay, it's only white. You're not welcome to be a libertarian if you're not white. But again, it's the controlled establishment limousine liberal saying that. And then once, okay, it's all white, okay, now you're the Al-Qaeda.
Precisely. And I mean, they admit in the video that it's all white people, and yet then they accuse you of crossing the Rubicon of race and believing in paranoid conspiracy theories simply for pointing the fact out. And not to mention the FBI, their extremist probe called Operation Vigilant Eagle was all about targeting returning veterans as terrorists. We had, of course, the Boy Scouts Explorer program where Boy Scouts are trained by Homeland Security to hunt down disgruntled Iraq war veterans, which again is pretty rich because while the federal government is simultaneously sending planes to bomb Libya in support of this Libyan Islamic fighting group, which killed US troops in Iraq, part of the Al-Qaeda group that they support now, simultaneously they're saying that returning veterans who fought in Iraq against these terrorists now supported by the US government are the new security threat for domestic terrorism. So it completely reveals the fact that, stretching far back as 10 years ago, you had the video where FEMA was saying the founding fathers were terrorists. This has been a gradual build-up, and we've been tracking it for over a decade, and now it's coming to fruition.
Well, Paul, that's what this has always been about by the globalist, is basically saying everybody's a terrorist. I saw reports early on in 2002 where they said a priest, a woman with a baby, someone wearing blue jeans, a cell phone. I mean, we published these Homeland Security documents we were sent where they teach cops everybody's a terrorist. But for the public, they take an unpopular group on average who they just blame for 9/11, Muslims. They say they're all extremist. And people say, well, that's a minority. Take their rights. You know, it's a tribal idea. Now they flip it on all the good old boys that said, yeah, or round up all the brown people. Now they're saying, no, it's you. It's the white guy. I mean, I told people a long time ago this was coming. We could see it coming a million miles away. Paul Watson over at prisonplanet.com. We'll continue to watch your very informative reports, the video reports you're posting to prisonplanet.tv, and also the news articles you're writing. I know it's it's past midnight over there where you're at, and we'll see you back tomorrow. Paul Watson, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Alex.
All right, there goes Paul Watson. Well, look, this show's supposed to be 30 minutes long, and I've got TV networks and stations that want to pick it up. But here in the fledgling launch of InfoWars Nightly News, it can be 45 minutes. It can be an hour long as we get the show launched by 7 o'clock Central. Now, we're going to go back to the subject of what's happening in the economy on the other side with Gerald Celente. But as we take you out to break, Ron Paul has gotten aggressive, and that's what we need to see. They've got a new Gallup poll out showing he's only 4 points behind the leader, Rick Perry, in Iowa. And he's now put out a new ad titled, Rick Perry, Texas cheerleader for Al Gore.
The establishment called him extreme and unelectable. They said he was the wrong man for the job. It's why a young Texan named Ron Paul was one of only 4 congressmen to endorse Ronald Reagan's campaign for president, believing in Reagan's message of smaller government and lower taxes. After Reagan, Senator Al Gore ran for president, pledging to raise taxes and increase spending, pushing his liberal values. And Al Gore found a cheerleader in Texas named Rick Perry. Rick Perry helped lead Al Gore's campaign to undo the Reagan Revolution, fighting to elect Al Gore president of the United States. Now, America must decide who to trust, Al Gore's Texas cheerleader or the one who stood with Reagan. Ron Paul, restore America now.
We are back. It's InfoWars Nightly News here Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern at InfoWarsNews.com and PrisonPlanet.tv/news. We are expanding our operations against the global crime syndicate. We are in their face in defense of human liberty and a new renaissance for humanity in the fight against global banker occupation. And someone who's been on the very front line of that fight for a very long time is the best-selling author and researcher, top trends forecaster Gerald Celente. And with more on what's happening with our economy and with a breakdown of future trends is Gerald Celente joining us from New York. Gerald, thank you for coming on with us tonight.
Well, I like being on a news show with real news.
Well, thank you, my friend. Good to have you here. So much is unfolding. You've predicted the collapse that we're now entering, but still the very banksters that promised us that they would fix everything are telling us, well, things aren't going well, but don't worry, we're getting record bonuses, and it's not a problem. Just continue to give us trillions in bailouts. In fact, Bernanke is back in the news today saying U.S. banks' exposure to Europe is manageable, but it turns out these foreign banks are the ones that basically own our banks. Gerald Celente, what do you say to that?
Well, I would ask public enemy number one, Osama bin Bernanke, why then have they pumped in, what was it, $1.2 trillion into foreign banks and U.S. banks, such as Societe Generale, the Royal Bank of Scotland? If all these banks are doing so great, what do they need our dough for? And no, the exposure is on both sides of the pond, and there's no way out. As a matter of fact, you know, they call this guy Norio Rabini Dr. Doom, and they keep talking about his forecasts. And, you know, he comes on after things sometimes happen and then readjusts them, as he did today in Bloomberg. And he said, I thought a few months ago that the perfect storm would be 2013. Well, in 2010, he said that we weren't going into a double-dip recession. But here's what he goes on to say. And remember, he's a member of the White Shoe Boy Club. You need to restore economic growth, not 5 years from now. You need to restore it today. In the short term, we need to do massive stimulus. Otherwise, there's going to be another Great Depression. Where are we going to get this massive stimulus from, Mr. Rabini, who, by the way, said, you know, people that invest in gold are basically out of their mind and didn't think gold could go, well, maybe $1,500 an ounce. So now what they're saying is, and this is what they're all saying, is more stimulus. More stimulus means more digital dollars, means continued low interest rates, means a